I believe I will confirm I am live. Good morning, everyone who's here. If you can hear me, um, actually, let me use my computer. Probably play some music this morning. I don't know why I did this like I'm at work. Actually, let me switch to my other account. Make sure I'm audio. I want someone just be in the chat right now, and it's working. Yeah. I'm gonna just turn on some jams. I don't think y'all will be able to hear them, so that works for me. Let me just go share this real quick that I am live. Turn on my work playlist. So, for everyone who doesn't know what we're doing today, we are covering my recent trip to England. We called it a Wesleyan pilgrimage. If anyone's wondering what my shirt, this is "Do Justice, Love Mercy, Walk Humbly." This is a quote from the prophets. Realistically, you could say this comes from many prophets, but there's a specific prophet this comes from. And this is from Disciple Dojo. If you like the shirt, it comes in different colors. Go get it. He makes great stuff. Fellow Methodist YouTuber. He's covered a fair amount of really tons of stuff. Like me, he used to do more Bible reviews than anything. Well, first he really did lessons. He did lessons for an area. I think it was in a Ruth's Chris during the day. I don't know how he got set up with being able to do it inside of Ruth's Chris, but Ruth's Chris is like, at least the one here is like upscale steakhouse. So I don't think he was eating there on a regular basis, for to be clear. Um, but oh yes, I was sharing this, and we're just going to be walking through a lot of that. I'm going to be sharing a lot of cool stuff. If you yourself are a Methodist or in another Wesleyan tradition, you might find a lot of this stuff super interesting. If you're not, you'll hopefully get to learn a bit about Methodism and Methodist history and Wesleyan history, and a lot of cool stuff. England was also super awesome. Not everything. It is unfortunately, if you're on the more conservative side like I am, I put myself in a moderate camp, politically, theologically conservative, then you're going to have a lot of problems with how some of the things are there. But I actually quite liked it overall. But like London was weird. London felt just commercialized, literally everywhere. But I can get to that when we get into London. I have to share my screen now and figure out how to do that. Present. Here we go. If I had time, I would have made this like a proper PowerPoint, but I don't. Let me see. I can just move this over here, full screen my stream, and then see what y'all are seeing. So we're going first, we landed in the airport. This is, I want to say this is us in the London airport. After we've landed, you can tell I'm looking rough. But it was a fun, not a fun plane ride. It was a 10.5, about 10-hour plane ride to the London airport where we landed, and then we drove up to Sheffield. I should have pulled up a map of England. We basically made like a triangle back to London. So we landed in London, went up. If I'm correct, we went up and then down and then back over to London, if I'm correct. But the London airport was neat, very busy, but everyone was very nice. I've noticed that in most airports, not in America. Maybe this is something about American airports. They're actually pretty friendly. Of course, they're in a hey, you need to get through. We're in a rush, especially when they're really busy. When they're not very busy, it's very different. But like the tourist airports, London. I've been to Madrid and the big Portugal airport. Those are my exactly 2 international flights. But all 3 of those airports, everyone was really nice, and I've heard the same thing from people who do travel a lot more than me. I worked my butt off to get to go to this one, which is why me and my wife got to go to this one. I worked a bunch of months of overtime, and then the first one was a gift. So very grateful for that. But if you want to know what you look like at the end of 10-hour flight. There you go. But Sheffield. So I think this was just a cool building. I just like a lot of the old architecture and stuff. There's a lot of cool old architecture, more Victorian time. But this was St. Andrews, I believe. And most of the churches here that we went to, as with a lot of where you're going to go in London, in England as a whole, was Church of England, not Methodist. But this is one of the many places Wesley at one point preached. And of course, they eventually barred him for the history there. John Wesley is famous, of course, for preaching revival, but a lot of that entailed preaching to people, hey, you are sinners. You need to turn from your sin. You actually need to live out a holy life. And people really didn't like that. England was in a really spiritually depraved state at this time. And telling people, hey, you can't sin. And when he starts telling, hey, the poor are part of the church too, and we need to be bringing them in, stuff like that. So eventually he went out to them. I believe I remember the quotes on that, so I'll have a good story there when we get there. But a lot of people really didn't like that. He was like, hey, you're sinners. Look up his it was the last sermon he preached in, was it Oxford or Lincoln Church? I think it was Oxford. And he's talking to the faculty, and it's scriptural Christianity. Look up that sermon and read it. And bear in mind, when he is reading that sermon, he is saying that to people who have been ministers at some time, who are heads and influential people in a Christian education and institution at that time. And he's saying that to them, and it's true of them, and they don't like it. So, like the Pharisees, it cuts their heart, and they bite back. Sort of like a brood of vipers, if you will. And this is the other side of the street. This was something you'll notice a lot in various parts of England. If you're, at least in where I live in Oklahoma, or where I used to live, they had what we call historic homes, where they're older, and if they meet whatever criteria, you can't just repair them yourself. The only way you can do repairs on them or replace things is if you're doing it within the guidelines they have. Normally, it's going to be using older lumber or the same type of wood. It's going to be using certain types of plumbing material, certain types of glass, stuff like that. Me and my wife had a chance to buy one for a really reasonable price. It was like $200,000, which is up at that time was a bit more of a expensive home. It was a cheaper home in Oklahoma for what we were getting, which was 3 floors, 8 bedrooms, an office, and a built-in library. However, it wasn't finished being painted. It was in the middle of repairs that we would have had to pick up and cover. And because it was a historic home, we couldn't just do that ourselves or pay some random Joe. It was probably going to be at least $100,000 more just for repairs and initial insurance on things. And we were like, well, we can't really afford $300,000. As great as that house would have been for a lot of long-term stuff. But this was across the street, so you'll see a new modern building, and a really old building. And we'll have another picture later on more things in there. Is there a way I can full screen this? That did not work. So sorry, you'll see the Google Drive in the background. That's okay though. And this was inside St. Anthony's. I believe this was the priest. I don't think he used it again. I think he was a priest. I didn't take pictures of a lot of stuff inside. You'll need to go yourself to see them, but they had you'll see a lot. I wonder if I got a picture of the golden eagle. I did not. A lot of the churches had a golden eagle, which represents from the Gospels. I believe it's John. You'll have a lot of section because there's still Satan church over there. So you'll have areas where there's flags of England and various other places as well, stuff like that going on. But it's really pretty. This is John Wesley's desk. There's the stained glass in the background. I thought I got more pictures of the stained glass. Unfortunately, I did not. This was the desk that he had that was left there once they kicked him out. This was his prayer desk. They're actually still using it. I opened it up and there's stuff inside. Let me open it up. It was cool. And this is where John Wesley preached shortly, a few blocks away from this church. I don't know how clear the description is. I preached in Paradise Square in Sheffield to the largest congregation I ever saw on a weekday, July 15th, 1779. And it's very specific. On a weekday, he preached to 30,000 people there on a weekday. And Sheffield Square was not, well, it's not big now. It was probably an open square at the time. Now it's surrounded by buildings. But even then, right, you have 30,000 people have to hear you. And that many people showed up on a weekday. it's kind of crazy, and he preached to much larger crowds. I don't know how much larger. I think some 50,000 plus crowds on weekends, and stuff like that. So kind of crazy. And that was Sheffield. We were only there for a little bit. That was our first day. We drove up to Sheffield. We landed in London after our flight. Immediately went to Sheffield because if you've ever been on a plane, don't go to bed right away. It's not a good idea. Um, and then we went to Sheffield, and then I think we stayed the night in Epworth, or we stayed the night in Sheffield, and then drove up to Epworth the next day. Either way, we were in Epworth the next day. This is the famous for Wesleyans. This is the front of the Epworth Rectory, kind of looking out at some of the neighboring houses. They have a nice little bench there. They have a really nice little garden section I got some pictures of. I should have grabbed my wife's photos, but here we are. But Epworth is where John Wesley's dad was the priest there for a long time, and his family lived there. John Wesley grew up there. Of course, Samuel Wesley has his own much more complicated history of being there, not being there. It's a whole mess. Samuel Wesley was just a man, and he did some great things, and he did some not so great things. I'm sure we will all have stories like that. And actually, I will put some books in the doobly-doo at the end of this. It'll either be today or tomorrow. So if you watch this on Saturday, check the comments on Sunday. If you watch this some other time, then they should already be there. Just some history books and some of the stuff that details. You'll understand why John Wesley was so much more influenced by Susanna Wesley, his mother, than he was by Samuel Wesley. Samuel spent, unfortunately, a lot of time away from the kids when he didn't really need to. And them living in Epworth came with a lot of trouble. He was a Tory. He was a loyalist. So he was loyal to the crown. He was in support of the crown. And that was a very big sticking point that caused a lot of clashes in his day, depending on where you were. In London, he didn't have many problems. Here in Epworth, he had a lot of problems. His farm animals at one point were maimed. He also, when he showed up, it's like, oh, I can farm. He was an incredibly intelligent man, not a good farmer. Should have kept all his staff there, and unfortunately he didn't, and they saw the consequences for it. But their home, their field was burned down, their animals were maimed, and then their house was burned, and then it was burned a second time to the ground. John Wesley almost died. That's where we get his mother using the phrase plucked, like a brand plucked from the fire, pulling from the prophets. And thought John Wesley was saved by God for a very special purpose. Susanna Wesley very much had a very strong idea of the providence of God and his movements in every aspect of life. John Wesley picked up that and many other things from her. She was an incredible woman, by the way. She knew Greek and Latin by the time she was 13. I don't know if she also knew Hebrew, but she's the one who taught John and Charles and her daughters Greek and Latin as well. Incredibly intelligent woman, and did that as a stay-at-home mom, had 19 kids. Incredible story. But we're at Epworth Rectory, and a lot of that tension came from them being Tories and loyalists versus those who were not loyalist, and that became especially problematic when the royalty sent in the Dutch to drain the swamps of Epworth, and they then split up the land, a third to the Dutch, a third to the crown and the Marquess that they had stationed there, who was a friend of Samuel Wesley, and then a third back to the people. So the people were not happy that their land was now being given to these people they didn't know, they didn't want there, and was being taken from them. And Samuel Wesley paid the consequences for that. But their house was rebuilt and much better. This is some keys from the Epworth Old Rectory. Feel free to pause this. I'll actually zoom this in a bit for anyone who wants to pause it. No, I would like to go up, please. And read this yourself. But this is the original chimney from the first home. When they rebuilt it, they actually brought this back. And this was neat. This was just a neat little thing. And then I wonder if the next picture is not. But chimney stack, they have a dresser there. There's sort of entryway. It's like a, hey, welcome to the Wesley home. Well, this was a cool. I'll actually see if the next one's. Okay, we'll talk about this fireplace real quick. This was a funny fact. So when a new priest would be stationed there, a rector, then because the home still belonged to the Church of England, though Samuel Wesley paid out of it with his own pocket a few £100s, which was an extremely large amount of time. Samuel Wesley was never able to hold on to money, despite the fact he easily made more than was enough money to live on for him and his family. He was constantly in debt, and ended up in debtor's prison because of it. But when a new rector would come in, well, they'd want a chimney in the room they use, that, a little fireplace, so they can stay warm in the room they're using. So you see a bunch of these little fireplaces all throughout the house of them being added in over time. It was really funny. But this clock was cool. So this clock, I believe, there's no way I'll be able to zoom in and get that reading. I believe this was gifted to John Wesley. This part right here, you'll notice the woods are different color, and this was later built. And you can put some stuff in here. And this clock's the original. Wesley had this added later, and it was just a little carryover that Wesley himself added back in the house because he worked there for a long time with his father. But this was like their game room at home with the Wesleys, the parlor. Now, again, I'll zoom in here so people can sort of read things. Oh, that actually cleared up quite nice. But this was a neat little home. This was a very nice home, even now, but especially for them. But this is Susanna and Samuel Wesley, madly in love with each other, and also at times madly contentious with each other. Both incredibly strong individuals. We'll have a fun little story on that when we get there. And this was a really nice but narrow staircase. If you're ever in England, just be prepared for everything to be smaller, because everything's a little smaller. Hallways are a little smaller. The roads are a little smaller. Vehicles are a little smaller. Even their buses are a little thinner. Bathrooms are smaller. Be prepared for some tight bathrooms. And they bike a lot of places too, which is weird. I don't think I grabbed any pictures, but especially at like Oxford, there's a lot of places, especially more popular places, that are famous for thievery and pickpockets. And we saw tons of places where, unlike, say, where I live, if that were the case, then parents would not want their kids walking anywhere alone. They'd be very worried, very panicky. But they had kids walking everywhere to school. And I mean, like everywhere. It was awesome to see. And people would just leave a lot of bikes out. Yeah, they'd chain up some of them, but everyone knows a chain's not going to stop a bike thief. And they just leave them. I guess there was just like this cultural understanding. You don't take the bikes because that's how these kids are traveling, especially the university kids who are there and can't afford anything. Can relate to that life. But there's also some cool paintings here on this next side. Wow, this is sideways. Dang, that uploaded wrong. So this is a bit better of it. So this is a picture. This is the original picture, but this is a picture of the burning of the house. And I'll go back to this one for a second. You'll see here they made a human ladder. This is Samuel Wesley. He's praying because he thinks everyone's been saved from the fire. And then there's John Wesley up there in the window. They had to build a human ladder to get him. And there weren't any more fires at the rectory after that. Oddly enough, it's almost as if the people had burned down the house, trying to drive them out of the town. And then when they almost killed their son, they were like, okay, maybe we need to tone it down a little bit. There's never actually any proof that people are the ones who burned down the house anytime, but it was pretty clearly understood. They are the ones who attacked the Wesley home, trying to drive them out of town. And this is just the backyard. It was really nice. This was cool. This is a rope bed. There are a little hose at the end. Keep your bed tight. It was about tightening the ropes at your bed. That was basically what kept your mattress. They'd have rope and straw. They wouldn't have mattresses like we do today, especially if they were poor. They really didn't. But the Wesleys became very, this is the chair, became very smart and improvised and bought very specific things for a lot of specific purposes. So like this chair, and I'm guessing this is where Samuel Wesley picked this up from. This is a chair, right? It's also a desk and a praying spot. So this back of the chair can be lowered down. I wonder if I got a picture of that. I did not. I got a picture of this. I believe it's a Bible. Can be lowered down, and you can kneel at it and pray at it. It's got a little thing that you can pull out and use as a little kneeler. You can use it as a writing desk. They were really very much how much can we get out of what we're having here? And again, they have a beautiful backyard there. I wish we could have shown up what was in full bloom. But this is a picture of Samuel Wesley's desk. This is one of the nicer areas in the home. There's a bookshelf with books they think he would have had. And then, of course, another little desk there. And again, one of those other little fireplaces. But this was just a lovely little home. And this was a really interesting. I believe this was an embroidery. Either way, this is one of the last phrases, if not the last phrase, John Wesley spoke when he died. Best of all, the best of all, God is with us. I got myself a little metal bookmark that actually has that on there. And these are 4 places he preached. There's a church there in the background. I'm not sure how clear that's going to come through. Yeah, right there. I don't remember which churches are which off the top of my head. I believe one St. Andrew's. I believe one is St. Paul and Peter's. I can't quite remember. But this is the tombstone of his father, which we'll see shortly, where he did preach a sermon on. And we'll get to that story. But this is just sort of like a little, hey, these are major episodes in John Wesley's life. And then this picture, oh, my wife's there in the reflection. You'll see this in quite a few places. The world is my parish. This is a biography. Those are little words in this image. So, hey, look, you could read John Wesley's biography here. But this entire thing is made up of words. It's a really fascinating piece. And I wish I'd gotten one. And again, this is sideways. This is a breakout of... Oh, I didn't take a picture of the painting, I don't think. This is John Wesley's death scene. They expanded the room. It was not as big as it is in the actual painting. But then this is a little... Hey, these are all the people that are here in this painting. And these were all people that did show up at John Wesley's deathbed, but they were not, of course, all there at the same time. This is Charles Wesley. I believe this is his sister. See if the AI thing will clear this up. It's as close as it'll get, unfortunately. I believe this is Charles, his wife, and their 3 of their kids. The 3 that survived, anyway. Yeah. And then, fun fact about this. So we didn't know who this woman was. One thing about the Wesleyan movement, this is him preaching, and then there's sort of mob there. And then again, Wesley preaching in a crowd now listening. Wesley was attacked by mobs several times. Many Methodists were. And in one of the episodes of John Wesley being attacked, a woman actually intervened, and she almost got beat to death by the mob, saving John Wesley's life. And I think this is that woman. No one there actually knew who this woman was. They haven't figured it out yet, at least the people there. But she looks like she's in a wedding gown, so we're not sure what all that was about. But this was just like a, hey, look how things changed over the years. The Wesleyan movement at one point was met with literal mobs, beatings, attacks on them, burning downs of their buildings. And people really didn't like that they were pushing them to live out holy lives and calling them out for sin and saying, hey, these are things you can't be doing as a Christian. These are not okay things. They critiqued the slave trade. They critiqued consummation of alcohol. They did a lot of things that cut into a lot of people's lives. They really didn't like that. That is my wife, anyone wondering. Most amazing wife in the world. It was an amazing trip and worth all that overtime to make sure we could both go. This was their kitchen table, and this is this was in the kitchen. But it was also not just a kitchen. This is a book called Primitive Physics by John Wesley. He was very big on caring for body and soul, so he wrote a book of medicine, and it was actually his best-selling book. I don't know if it's still his best-selling book, but it was for a very long time, if not still is. And this was not only in the kitchen where they'd cook, but they'd also mix up their medicine and stuff here. And this was to help people who couldn't afford doctors, and make sure that they can still, get their medicine and have some form of home treatments. There are some in there we look back and we're like, oh, that's really weird. But then there's one, I can't remember if you wash it in horse fat or pig fat and lye and hot water. And that's soap. That's what that is. But you wouldn't know that reading it the first time. Just fun facts there. And then this was, of course, just their fireplace. And they cooked over a little stove pot. If you're wondering why they cooked over a pot and not a stove, it's because they didn't have stoves. They had these pots. That's it. And then this was a fun little thing. So they found these. Did I just take a screenshot of that? Yeah, well, they were doing work in here and found these hollow spots on the wall, and they knocked it out. Then they found, you really can't tell what these are. This is a shoe, or this is the shoe, and this is like a little strap. Yeah, I didn't get a better picture of that. That is my bad. Okay, so these are like little interwoven straps and then a shoe. They at the time it was pretty common for these to be put in as like a warding off of bad spirits. I don't think the Wesleys did this. They weren't the most superstitious individuals, even though Wesley himself actually performed a few exorcisms. I think the builders actually put these into the walls without the Wesleys knowing about it, or maybe they did know. I don't know. And was to ward off evil spirits. And then this is yeah, I did get a good picture. This is a letter interaction. So when Samuel Wesley got locked up in debtor's prison, Susanna Wesley, at one point, the new rector had come in. He was a rather dry preacher in the first place. And Susanna Wesley was also not very happy. He kept preaching on debt, like on a regular basis. And Susanna was not happy with that because her husband is in prison for debt. Of course, it was her fault, but like that, I guess that was his favorite preaching topic for some reason. And she at nights, and then started doing it at another point, she'd just have little prayer services in her home. She would pray with her family and her servants, read maybe some scripture. And that was normally it. There wouldn't normally be exposition, though at times, of course, there was. But eventually people started showing up to that instead of the service because they disliked the rector's preaching so much. They'd rather show up to Susanna's Wesley's house and deal with the preaching. Well, at some point, of course, the bishop and stuff and the rector were not happy about this. And the bishop wrote a letter to Samuel Wesley and said, hey, you need to get your wife to stop this. And this was her response. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I think I just need to read this last paragraph. I need not tell you the consequences if you determine to put an end to our meeting, right? So she's willing to listen to her husband. You may easily foresee what prejudice it may raise in the minds of these people against Inmon, especially, who has had so little wit as to speak publicly against it. 'Tis true, I can now keep them to the church, but if it's laid aside, I doubt they'll never go to hear him more. Talking about the rector. At feast those that come from the lower end of the town. Whereas if this be continued till your return, which now will not be long, it may please God by that time so to change their hearts that they may love and delight in his public worship, so as never to neglect it more. I shall add but a few words more. If you do after all think fit to dissolve this assembly, do not tell me any more than you desire me to do it. In other words, tell me plainly, for that will not satisfy my conscience. But send me your positive command in such full and express terms as may absolve me from all guilt and punishment for neglecting this opportunity of doing good to souls, when you and I shall appear before the great and awful tribunal of our Lord Jesus Christ. I dare not wish this practice of ours had never begun, but it will be with extreme grief that I shall dismiss them, because I foresee the consequences. I pray God direct and bless you. And then this little note, Mr. Hall desires to know of you whether Kaywood's instruments for navigation are approved of at London, because if they be, he would get them. But that's her response to her husband. It's like, yeah, I'll do it if you tell me to, but if you better do it plainly, because you'll be the one answering to God for it. And then this is a photocopy of the original letter there. But they were both Spitfires. Shortly after, of course, Samuel Wesley is let out of prison. A little bit of money comes his way. And even while he's in prison, he still, not realizing he's in debtor's prison, tries to get books sent into the prison, because he's, of course, ministering to the people in there. And is like, hey, these books are £10. And he's like, yeah, can we make that happen? Luckily, friends of his get the money together for the £10 to get the book sent into the prison for ministry work. And this is their herb garden specifically. I wish we could have seen this in full bloom. This is where they grew their medicines and stuff. And then they have an active little garden there. It was really neat to see. And they have kids and stuff that come out and they learn gardening and stuff there. This is a fuller picture again. I would love to have seen this when everything was fully grown. And this is their little walking garden. You see these things are currently dried out. Some of the trees aren't green yet. Seeing all of this in full bloom, that would have been so gorgeous. So many sitting areas too to just enjoy it. And this is the outside of the house, and that is my lovely wife. And then we went to the Epworth Church, which is lovely. As we approached it, they have quite an extensive graveyard, and they do have two graves from people who died in World War II, soldiers. They have a little, I don't think I managed to snag a picture of it. I should have. A little war, oh gosh, what were they called? War grave council or something signed somewhere. That's kind of, if there's a soldier from World War II buried anywhere, that has to be there. This is part of the inside. You can see this neat ceiling. You'll have a lot of places have really neat ceilings up there, and this beautiful stained glass. But we actually sang in here. They did an afternoon service and a Eucharist. I got convicted on this one, just being plainly honest. I should, of course, have checked their beliefs. I knew we were going to be taking the Eucharist here, but I didn't. You see the little golden eagle I was talking about earlier too, as well, right there. Because if they have a bunch of beliefs I'm not on board with, as many places in Church of England do, I would have abstained from the Eucharist as I did elsewhere. But they also didn't have any super obvious signs of anything crazy. And I got convicted for just like kind of judging these people and assuming things about their own personal beliefs without any obvious sign of it. And in the face of all the hospitality they've shown us, they let us come in, and they literally, it looks like drove there just to perform the service for us and let us sing in this church and see some of the stuff that I'll talk about when we get there. And then I judged them, and I was like, man, I felt really convicted when I went up to that Eucharist rail and it was the reason we came here. This was the same Eucharist chalice John Wesley himself would have taken the Eucharist from many times. His father used, that John Wesley himself used, perhaps his brother Charles as well, and where they were both baptized. We got to remember our baptism in their baptismal font. But we sang right here. It was really great. We sang elsewhere too. In this font were baptized John and Charles Wesley, and this is their baptismal font. Of course, clearly they put the little metal bowl in there, but we dip our hand in, remember baptism. Anyone who's done that before. And then this is Samuel Wesley's tomb, where John Wesley preached on top of. Like we kept telling, this is the pastor went with Ray. This was our tour guide, Gerald. If you ever go over there and we use Nawas International. I recommend them. I don't know if they're the cheapest, but they did really good for us. We were a group of 39 people, and it was an awesome tour. Gerald was a great leader. Did wonderful experience. Just prepared, if you pack your schedule tight or you want a packed schedule, let him know that. He will make sure it happens. If you don't want that, be sure to tell him, because they will run you around if that's what you want to do. But we tried to we were jokingly asked him, "Are you going to get up there and preach?" And he said, "I don't want to be known as the pudgy American pastor who fell through Samuel Wesley's tomb." But this is a bunch of just neat things. And here's us remembering our baptisms. I think it's the same picture of me twice. And we did some street preaching here. I don't know if the audio will.
Give your best shot, Josh.
Will play through on here. But I'll repeat what I said.
Soon the stones will cry out.
Oh, we did a little one sentence sermon was what we did there. He had quite a few of us get up and do it. So hopefully some of the people heard it. But it was just a little thing. Preach in a spot briefly where John Wesley preached. We didn't have time for a full sermon, unfortunately. And we'll get to Olney in a second. But my little one sentence sermon was, "You've forgotten the ordinances of the Lord your God. Soon the stones will cry out." I put together 2 scriptural quotes there. If you've watched our Means of Grace series, I believe the first video, I quote that first one. But this is, so depending on who you ask, the museum will tell you this is Cooper. The town will tell you it's Cowper. Do with that what you will. And Newton. I spill my drink on myself. This is, I believe, Henry Newton. I'm probably getting that wrong. I'm going to feel really dumb if I am later. This is the man who wrote Amazing Grace. That's what most people probably know him for. And then Cowper was like friend of his, sponsor of his, patron of his. They did a lot of work together. Cowper was a famous poet in his time. Maybe not so much anymore, but several notable works. And this was growing in a ton of places. So I just took a picture of it because it was cool. But this is the inside of their house. Again, this area, a little more modest. They have later, this was the initial, and then later more was built on and added on by Cooper. And did I get a picture of the rabbit? I don't think I did. So he had what they called melancholy. And I'll just click through some of these. I just took them because they were cool. Depression. And one of the ways he dealt with it was by distracting himself. Well, that included having 3 rabbits that he just let run around the house. And you can see this is the same writing apparatus here. One of them, unfortunately, did get out one time and ran into the local tannery and was never seen again. But this was neat. I can't remember if this was an architect's desk or a copier's desk, but how this was used and how he may have used it. You'd set a book up here on the top, and then you'd have your own paper here or manuscript or whatever, and you could copy it. And you'd be able to just look up and then look back down. Not good on your back, but these aren't. Oh, and these are teasels, so you don't sit on them. That's all those are. But Cooper was involved with the slave trade. At one point, a slaver himself. At one point, briefly, a slave himself. Sort of like debt slavery, I believe. I can't remember off the top of my head. But this was just like a replica of what it likely did look like for a lot of these slaves when they were being traveled across the sea. And eventually, of course, he, like many, come to fight against the slave trade. England, I believe, abolishes it first. The Wesleyan movement has a famous history with it in England, especially. Was it William Wilberforce? One of the big parliamentary figures who did end up helping one of the big names in abolishing slavery. Wesley's last letter was to him, exhorting him to continue on in fighting that fight. And this was just his little desk writing area. I always wanted quill and ink, but I understand pen and paper. Anyway. And then this was the house where Amazing Grace was written. I believe it was written over here. And this part, I believe, was added in later, but it was written here in this room. It is a home. So if you want to go there, the family might let you tour it. I recommend calling the museum ahead of time. They have a connection with the family. They've talked to them. They've had some tours that go through there. And the family is willing to let people go through there when they're not using their house, of course, because it is their house. And this, I hope I spelled that right. And this is St. Paul and Peter's. No, this is not St. Paul and Peter's. Maybe it is St. Paul and Peter's. But this was such a beautiful, beautiful church. You can see this huge spire. You could see a lot of these churches you could see when you approach the town. And I didn't take a picture down here. You can see a little baptismal font here. But the windows, we noticed, are mirrored on both sides. So the 3 here, they look clear on the other side. But when you go on the outside, you see the pictures from inside on the outside of these, and then vice versa. It was really neat. But this was just a lovely, beautiful church. We had a violinist with us from the church we went with, and he got to play Amazing Grace here. Oh, it was so awesome. We got to go through a lot of evening and afternoon prayer services on a lot of these places, so it's really cool. And of course, John Newton, not Henry Newton, I was wrong, is buried here in the chapel cemetery. And I just took pictures of each side, should anyone be interested. The Kinsale, it's worn down by now, and that was Olney. Next up, Oxford. I'm sure everybody knows about Oxford. This is the Eagle and Child. This is where C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien are famous for having spent a lot of time with the Inklings in their bar. It's under construction right now. It has been bought out. It closed during COVID, unfortunately. I guess some really rich guy or perhaps a church or an institution or together, they bought it. I don't know what they're going to do with it. The people around, when we walked by it, also didn't know what was going to happen with it. It had a different name on the sign now, so I don't know if that's going to stay the same. But we'll find out in a couple of years. We walked right under it, too, looking for it, and we're like, where is it? And then when some of us, some walked backwards, some of us went forward to keep looking, and we're like, I wonder if it was that big construction rigging. And it was. They kindly put that on the outside. But here you see a lot of these bikes. This was Jess, wonderful tour guide. I can't remember what company she was with, or she was just private, but this is what I'm talking about. Like, they got bikes everywhere. And of course, this is a big old library. I really wanted to try and get in there, but they wouldn't let me. And they had a huge underground library too. Someone donated a personal collection that just kept growing and growing and growing as they added to over time. A deal had been made to where any new book printed, I believe, in England, or maybe it was just in Oxford, I can't remember, was freely given to the collection. Well, that deal still holds. So every time a new book's printed over there, it gets added to the collection. So it's huge, millions of books. And they've built underground. They've stored it in other buildings. It's awesome. We didn't get to go to the underground library as much as I would have loved to. I can just put this over. No, I didn't put that over there because then I can't see the comments. And this is us sort of walking. This is the Oxford Chapel where Wesley preached that sermon, Scriptural Christianity. And as he wrote in his journal, I preached it possibly for the last time in that building. And he was correct. It was the last time. This is where he likely preached Scriptural Christianity, maybe up here. We were in two separate groups, so we kind of walked in the same time. Pastor Ray was talking to the other group. But this was just an experience. Again, beautiful stained glass everywhere. Huge organs. They have organs in quite a few of the churches. If you like organs, wonderful. And this was just one of the courtyards. This was, I believe, where Wesley lived during his time at Oxford. And quite a few of them, they let this stuff grow on the walls. It actually looks really cool. Maybe I'm partial, but here you can see a little bust of John Wesley, and I highlighted it so it stands out there. But these are also still in use. So the door was closed. It's open during certain times. Not this time, as they were preparing for their final exams and stuff. They had a bunch going on. Again, another big chapel spire. I don't remember which church this was. I think we were just passing by it. This is, what was that? Yeah, the Wesley Memorial Church. As you can see, as with a lot of places, much more liberal over there. It's helpful in some ways, not so great in many other ways. But I'm talking about like environmental stuff mainly is what I'm talking about. That I'm like, hey, they do a good job on like recycling and stuff like that. But that's doesn't offset everything else. They were actually the British Methodist were actually having a council meeting in here, not a council meeting. I think they were having their annual meeting in here. So we didn't actually get to go in and check it out. Our tour guide was told she would by whoever's there on the phone the previous day. And then we got there and they were like, actually, that person was wrong. Sorry about that. And this was, I should say, Oxford Castle. Now it's Oxford Hill. Because the castle got destroyed and then plowed into the ground. So they wouldn't rebuild it. But I actually got some cool pictures from it. And this is us, I believe, approaching the Oxford Castle and prison. The prison is what I was more interested in. If anyone doesn't know, I'm going to prison chaplaincy. And I don't know where. I got a book from there. This whole file. Set it right here. I got quite a bit of stuff while I was there, book-wise. And these were complimentary from the Epworth Rectory. Like I said, they don't agree with them on everything over there, but they gave us free postcards. The story is Oxford Castle, from Dunghill to Dungeon. This was in the little, you can take a tour of the prison. You can get this in there. I thought I grabbed a different book, but I'm still excited for this one. Prison chaplaincy and prison history is something I like to study a lot. So I get books and stuff on that. I have a book of prison letters somewhere on my desk here. Speaking of the Primitive Methodists, as we did earlier, I also picked up myself a copy of that. So if you ever need a primitive medicine, let me know. But yeah, this place was just neat. They've turned the prison into a hotel now. I believe it was active until 1996. So it was active for a long time. And here's the inside. You can tell they still kept prison elements of it, so you can tell you're staying in what was once a prison. And their prison, even like American prisons up until the 1900s, till very late, I believe into the 1900s, you weren't guaranteed food. So one thing about the Wesleys and other early Methodists is caring for the sick, the poor, the oppressed, and prisoners was very big for them. And in a lot of cases, that was also because literally they may have been the only food supply for the prisoners. So they would go to the prisons. And that was one of the reasons that the Methodists were mocked, actually, is because they were going out and feeding the poor and the prisoners. So yeah, imagine that. The early Methodists were called Bible moths because they would read the Bible so much, right? Being mocked by other Christians for reading the Bible. They were called the Holy Club and stuff because they would do this. They would go out to people who literally would starve to death in the prisons if no one brought them food because the prison wasn't feeding them. And they said, oh, they're the Holy Club, like demeaning them for that. I'm like, they're literally being the hands and feet of God. What is going on here? England was in a really bad state at this time. But yeah, that was really special for me. Oxford Castle. Here's a little monument here. Let's see. Okay, so this was the queen who reopened it. I wondered if this was so. At one point, let me see. I don't think I grabbed a picture. There's around the back, sort of towards the prison side. There's a tower in the back. But Queen Matilda, her cousin, had tried to siege the castle. And he did succeed. He was claiming the throne for himself, and they'd been sieging it. Well, during a snowstorm, she has a rope thrown at the back. She dresses in all white and then escapes, goes down it while the siegers go around another side, goes down the back, gets to a iced over lake, and then skis across it on animal bones to escape and make it to those who will protect her. And she eventually gets a deal. She doesn't take the crown and throne back in her own time, but it will be given to her son when she passes away. And it's just like, man. Meanwhile, it's like maybe Matilda isn't actually that bad of a name. We had a joke about it. It's not a bad name. I like the name Matilda, but we were like, man, we could name our daughter that. And I was like, yeah, and I'll tell her she doesn't escape out the back of a castle turret in a snowstorm and then ski across the lake on animal bones by the time she's 30. That's how old the queen was when she did that. We're gonna have a talk. But that was awesome. And then, of course, this is Oxford itself, I believe. Yeah, this is Oxford itself, Lincoln College. Well, I mean, of course, everything's Oxford itself. Oxford has 39 colleges, for anyone wondering. So this is Lincoln College. Very big, very famous. Lots of stuff here. Alice in Wonderland, Harry Potter, lots of stuff and inspired stories come out of Lincoln College. And, of course, the Wesleys themselves, which was the bigger thing for us. But this place, packed with history. Lots of cool stuff here. Of course, they have a war memorial garden. World War II, of course, rocked England very hard with the bombing runs. Sheffield was one of the places we went. There was this huge, I thought I got a picture of it. It looks like it was maybe a mansion or a large work home where multiple families were staying and working on one plot of land that had just been flattened by the bombing runs. There was that everywhere. And has some not been rebuilt of. The ruins were still there. And I was just like, what was this place? We didn't have time to stop and inquire, unfortunately. Stuff like that is like the stuff if we could have just spent a lot of time in like the small towns where the bombing runs had hit hard and things hadn't been rebuilt, I would have been pretty happy. But this is just us going through the inside here. And man, this was a beautiful place. This is, of course, their chapel. In a lot of these chapels too, I went in and I prayed that the exact prayer I prayed in a lot of places is either revival, bring another Wesley, or bring judgment. Either build on the ashes of what is here or build on the ashes of the future. Because that's what a lot of, especially in our Western culture, churches need today, revival or judgment. And this is where, as you can see, John Wesley is memorialized here, Charles Wesley as well. He likely actually may have preached or at least gone up into this at some point. But him and Charles were memorialized here. And of course, on this trip, as with many other Methodist places, you'll mostly hear about John and or Charles Wesley. You don't hear a lot about the other Methodists. Unfortunately, some of the books I got that I'll get to actually were little biographies about some of the other early Methodists that were super influential. What is this? Let me see if I can zoom in. I cannot read this sideways. The few of him, faithful, good. Oh, it's a quote from Isaiah. There's just a neat list. Is that the last one? No, we got two more. This is just our group. The world is my parish. Oh, okay. I remember what this is. Yeah, this is Isaiah. Blessed, or how beautiful, blessed are the feet on the mountain that bring the good news. Something like that. It's a prophecy in Isaiah. Not a prophecy. It's a saying in Isaiah. It is a prophecy. Paul, of course, quotes this later and applies this to the pronouncement of the gospel. One thing that's very common in the Old Testament, we'll get through this in my Messianic series on the channel, is not only is the Messiah foretold, the suffering servant and everything, but the pronunciation of the gospel itself is also foretold. So a lot of richness there. This is a famous saying from John Wesley, the world is my parish. And we did another little bit of preaching here. And I used that saying from Isaiah and meant to talk about Paul's quote, but didn't. But again, a little brief, slightly longer sermon. And mine was that we need to be bringing the gospel to the world, both body and soul, not neglecting either. And the gospel, of course, itself includes judgment. Repent of your sins. So do not leave that out either. That is an important part of the gospel pronunciation. Repent of your sins. There, judgment is involved in the gospel proclamation. That was Hannah Mount. Used to be mines, and this is sort of where the home of field preaching for John Wesley began. It's with many things. If you read Richard Heitzenretter's history book, John Wesley and the people called Methodist, wonderful history. I highly recommend it. But it's important that and the people called Methodist there. Because a lot of things, Wesley didn't just come up with a lot of the methods on his own. As Heitzenretter, I believe, put it, he adopted and adapted many things. And that was a good thing. That was something John Wesley was really, really good at. And he was very not open to field preaching. I'll read through this. And George Whitefield he was preaching to the miners when they were coming out. There are famous tales from him and John. The miners would be, covered in soot. They'd work 12, 13-hour days, leave the mines. And then there were stories of there just being streaks of clear skin down the face of some of the miners because they would be crying from the preaching for various reasons. And it was massively effective. They would gather thousands, tens of thousands, hearing them preach at these times. But Whitfield's journal, Saturday, 17th February, 1739, in the afternoon, I went to Kingswood, very notable place for us Methodists. After dinner, I went upon a mount and spake. I believe I never was more acceptable to my master than when I was standing to teach those hearers in the open fields. Sunday, 1st, preached at the Howling Green, Hannam, and Rose Green. And then John Wesley's journal. I reached Bristol and met Mr. Whitfield there. I could scarce reconcile myself at first to this strange way of preaching in the fields, of which he set me an example of Sunday. They didn't include the quote there, or they really should have, where Wesley talked about, I almost thought it a sin to save souls outside the church. He was very big on the church itself. He was a Church of England man. And then a few days later, I preached about 1,500 on the top of Hannah Mount on Kingswood. And there's a funny little line on there where he basically called it vile. And then he said, not by the 8th, maybe it was by the 8th. And you can see the quick turnaround. Saturday, March 31st, Sunday, April 8th, he preached on there. He said, I chose to become more vile still. It's a good line. Church or no church, we must attend to the saving of souls. That really did shape John Wesley for a lot of his life. And I must not have got the picture from there, unfortunately. Do I have the new room here? I believe that was in Bristol, not Oxford. Yet here we are. Yeah, that was in Bristol. This is where we did a little bit of our preaching here. I'll get back into that story again. But again, these are the docks as well. This was another spot where the field preaching of sorts was very popular. And one very notable Methodist you never hear much about, Captain Thomas Webb. Captain Thomas Webb. He, like many sailors at the time, were captured by the two drugs of choice at the time, as we'd call it, gin and jack. But alcohol and gambling was their two vices of choice. I believe was the two common vices of the time. I believe is the exact phrase. And Thomas Webb and others were just a great story of how they started as these men who could just barely get by. The Methodists helped provide them with food. And of course, as with many Methodists, as the movement transformed their lives and they truly became servants of the Lord, well, they also became good stewards of their money. And in addition to not drinking and not gambling, they suddenly had a lot more money. And they went from being the ones provided for to now giving a penny, not much in our time, but much more back then, every week towards feeding others. So they are this group that went from being gambling alcoholics who were in debt and at times couldn't even eat to now providing for others and serving the Lord and sharing the gospel. And it's just such a beautiful story. And these are This is the area of the docks on which that would have happened. Not the same docks. The docks where Thomas Webb exactly was, I believe, were elsewhere in the town. But this was another nice set of docks. And of course, the bombing runs here hit really hard. You can see that church in the background. That's the church we're going to be going to. This was just a neat place. This was an upside down house. We don't know if it was about the Wizard of Oz or anything. We didn't stop and ask. It was literally just there as like you can pay to go in the backside and then run around a house and look like you're upside down in the house. You can walk on the ceiling. It's just neat. It was in the sort of more artsy parts of town. But this is, where is this, Bristol? There's a Salisbury. Either way, this is the cathedral there. I may have gotten my towns confused organizing these. You can see beautiful cathedral. And you'll notice in a lot of these places, and even in the few conservative churches we found, by conservative, I mean actually Christian, they're Trinitarians, they believe Christ resurrected, they believe he was actually God. There are signs in like every place that we went to that are like, everyone is welcome here. Like that was just everywhere. I don't know. At some point you'd think someone might want to do it to be different. I didn't take pictures of the inside, but this was a lovely chapel. There's actually a picture of Charles Wesley's son in here in one of the stained glasses. These windows especially, but the stained glasses and stuff got blown out during the bombing runs. And they actually, in one of the walls, built some and had like a memorial to the people that were killed in the bombing runs, to nurses, to police officers, and to others, soldiers. It's a commemoration to those who had been killed in the bombing runs. It was actually really beautiful. Excuse me. And then they had a nice little garden in the back. Me and my wife, this is her, went to and kind of walked around. We didn't have a chance to sit around. This is me with all my gear. These were my headphones for a little, they called them whispers as they were talking to us. And this was just a little holder for my passport and my wallet. But you can also see the backside. Lovely church. Many, many lovely churches. This is my raincoat. So we were expecting it to be quite rainy in England, as it normally is. And actually the weather was really nice. I think it rained like one day. But man, again, I really wish we could have been here when everything was in full bloom. But this is John Wesley's new room. And this is a very, very important place for Methodism and the Wesleyan history in general. This is one of those places Wesley would preach to the miners. To give an example of their history, and I'll head to the room. And I'll have a history of this pulpit. Is the miners, right? They're working 12, 13-hour shifts. Well, John Wesley was famous for getting up at 5 a.m. If you stayed in him with his house, the times he was at his house, he let people stay constantly. Travelers, the poor, widows, orphans, like constantly people were staying at his house who were not him. And his condition was, you're going to have to get up at 5 a.m. with me and go to chapel. And he would do that. He'd get up at 5 a.m. and go to chapel. Well, he did that here too. The new room was eventually built. This was not where he was preaching in at the beginning, though he came to when it was built here. And they would have a 5 a.m. service for the town. And the miners would show up and or their kids on the way to school and then on the way to work and listen to them preach. And then they'd do it again at 7 p.m. after the miners got off work, and they'd head there. So these miners are working, 12, 13-hour days, and then going to a service before and after their work. That is incredible commitment. And that shows the power of Methodism at this time in this area, especially as they are doing this in the face of the town's most common trade, which was slavery. The Methodists were constantly speaking out against that in England. American Methodists sort of became a little more lax on it for a while. Not all American Methodists. That was a huge split over it. And it caused a lot of division with the powerful in the town. They even attack the new room, stuff like that. That's why this chapel is built strangely. You see this banister here, and the preacher clearly stands. John Wesley would preach up here, others would preach down here. It's because it would give them a head start. If a mob or something rushed in, it'd give them a head start, a 60-second head start to run away and get out of there before the mob caught up to them. This communion rail was added in much later. This originally wasn't here. And this was Captain Webb's tomb. Ray pointed out, he noticed one time he was buried here and pointed out to us when we came through here. And I was like, that's awesome. But yeah, this is the new room. This is where a lot of things happen. I actually got some books in here too. There's a little like used book thing in there. This is the big thing for me. I got a commentary on the Epistle of James. I'm hoping to do some work in there in the book of James in 2026. I've done a bit of work now on the Christology of James, but I'm going to do a lot more. But here you can see this is someone carved this into the glass. On brittle glass, I gave my name, a follower of the bleeding lamb, but thou canst show a nobler art, engrave thy name upon my heart. It's can. That's how we would probably translate this here. But this is one of those weird things. In certain writings, can and canst or cannot swapped meanings. It was strange. This was the preacher's common room where they sort of meet ahead of time. Here's John Wesley's rules for preachers. He probably followed about 4 of these rules. So regularly preaching over time, going off topic. I'm going to lose my voice by the time this is done. And this is where we did our other little sermon here. And people were walking by, again, when we were doing this. There was a little girl watching us in her window. She's like, who's this large group of strangers in my backyard? This is my wife. She was very nervous doing this, but it was awesome. Where to next? This was a little town called Pill. So another story about the new room. I'm going to have to stop if I lose my voice in the middle of this. We're going to go out of order here. This is a picture of Francis Asbury sailing out. So in the new room, later in Methodist history, the question came up of what are we going to do about the American colonies? Because England wasn't sending priests over. Wesley tried for years to get priests sent over for the Methodist, to get priests ordained that were Methodist. But the Church of England wouldn't send anyone over, not even for their own parishes. That's how the Episcopal Church started before the Methodist Church started in America. Was they wouldn't send priests over. So the Church of England there were like, okay, we're done. You haven't sent priests. You haven't been sending people to baptize us. You haven't been sending people to give us the Eucharist. You're not helping us. You've abandoned us because we're Americans and you're British. And they said, if you want to abandon us and leave us here, all right, we're done. And unfortunately, that is similar to what happened with the Methodist movement. The Methodist split was a bit more complicated. And for a time, there was a Methodist Episcopal Union. But that is what happened with the Episcopals and the Methodists. That was really the heart of what led to it all, was the Church of England refusing to send priests. And, after years, 10 years, I think 14 years of refusing to send shepherds to feed the flock, they said, all right, we're done. And I may have advocated for trying to stick it out longer, but I can't blame them personally. I'm like, yeah, if someone's not feeding the flocks, if they are failing to be the church, you have to do something. But Francis Asbury accepted the call in New Room. He felt the Lord placed it on his heart. This is where he sailed out. And he left his entire family. He never returned to England. And he had a girlfriend. And he later wrote his mother and that she was the love of his life, basically, that his heart desired her. And he didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to her. He tried to find her and say goodbye, but the ship ride left too quick. And I believe I did get a good picture of it where he sailed out of. You see here in the background, all these boats are in the mud. Well, what England has, I'm in Oklahoma. We're landlocked. We don't have this. They have tides that move massively in their river channels, including here in Pill. This is sort of like a little bay. It used to have probably been it was a proper ship bay, a port at one point, but clearly not anymore. But their tides rise 40, 45 feet up and down throughout the day. London's river channels had, I think, a 25-foot tide difference. And of course, if it goes too high, they have little things that will mark, hey, there's a flood coming. And this is where he sailed out of, and then would have sailed out through here to head to America, where he never returned. He gave up his entire life to then go proclaim the gospel in America. And I think they believe he rode like 1 or 2 million miles on horseback in his time in America. It's crazy. This is just a little monument to the occasion. Pill was a lovely little town. I'd love to go back. I'd love to retire there maybe one day. We'll see what the Lord has, but it was just a lovely, lovely little town. And they have a little growing Methodist church and Baptist church there. Not much going on. Pill, like most of England, not the most religious place anymore, but there are a few churches that are growing over there, so we're keeping an eye on those. And this was just an awesome little place. And then here's the wife and I. You see, it was rather windy while we were out here, so my hair is kind of crazy. Yeah, if it's not clear where my hairline's receding now, it's hopefully also clear seeing me bald and seeing it in these photos. What else we got here? Salisbury. Salisbury was neat. I think I can use my keypad. I should have been doing this entire time. Salem College is like a big music college. We didn't get to go in there. It would have been cool too. But this is Salisbury Cathedral. This is where the Magna Carta is currently held. It's in this box here. We can't take pictures of the Magna Carta. Well, we're not supposed to. Maybe some people definitely did, but we weren't the only tourists there. There were a lot of tourists there. But they kind of walk through the history of the Magna Carta. Here's the bishop's. I can't remember what it's called. It looks like a shepherd's crook, but I don't think they call it that. Of course, beautiful stained glass. And in there, they had this neat little like reliefs carved into telling the story, I think, of the Old Testament, or maybe it was just Genesis. This is like the garden. Or is this the mountain? This is the mountain with Moses. But they have Genesis and stuff in there. And these were just like cool little things you could pull out. Little, like literally wooden like panels you can pull out and read on. Was this Salisbury Cathedral? I think this is a different cathedral. This is a baptismal font. This was added in much later. This is not original. And you can see it's just super reflective. It's beautiful. You can see the people in it. See my wife taking a picture. I got a picture of her taking a picture and a reflection of her taking a picture. Pictureception going on here. But it is absolutely gorgeous. And this was a Book of Common Prayer in the back, I believe. It was. I don't know if I was supposed to take a picture of it and move it around, but it was open and in the public. And this is me in the new room, sort of mock preaching. I preached a little bit, but we were there as a group, so there was another people there. And then 7.2, Salisbury Methodist. I think this is Bristol. I absolutely mixed my photos up here. But this was awesome. This was just funny. There was a place called the Boston Tea Party in Britain. It just cracked us up. We loved it. And this was just a neat thing we found. Pause here if anyone wants to pause here. They have lots of neat architecture over there. But this is... Let me double check this. Let me double check before I assume this is wrong. About what church this is. No, this is Salisbury Methodist. Okay, I didn't get it wrong in my folder. So this is one of the more conservative British Methodists. For anyone wondering what their state is now, they're sort of like the UMC before the split. So England's massively liberal in every way you can think of, politically, theologically, etc. And Salisbury is that place of they are conservatives, moderates, and liberals, theologically speaking, all in the same group here. And this was one of the more conservative churches. They're growing actually, which is really nice. They have this beautiful like embroidered fabric. I'm not actually going to zoom in. You can go there and check it out. I think you can buy we got a mug somewhere with a picture of it, but it's like the creation story and the continual work of God. There's a lot wrapped up in this. You can check it online. And of course, they're big, beautiful organ. But this is how their church is set up. They have a little kids area. It's in the sanctuary. So they're like, no, we don't want the kids out of here. We want the kids in here. And I'm like, yes, thank you. Tons of places will send the little kids off. It's still rampant today. And I'm like, no, we need the kids in the church. That's how we help build foundations for people. That's how we help them grow. And as them being in the place of worship, of hearing the word of God. If you're sending the kids out, they're not building that foundation. It's really bad. Anyway. That is the end of Salisbury Methodist. And next, and this was our last stop, I was going to go through some of my purchases. I won't actually bother opening that up. London. This is Stonehenge. We just drove by it. They have a little barrier up as well. At actual Stonehenge, you can't get too close. Of course, people do. They'll sneak up there. but we just kind of drove by it. And this is Westminster Cathedral, whatever it is. The wife and I. And it was beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. My only complaint about this place, you can see the images here. I probably should have spoilered those. Here's John and Charles Wesley. The area they were in there where they were as closed off, they let us because we're Methodist on a big Methodist Wesleyan pilgrimage. Go in there and check it out. Is that they have blasphemers and heretics buried there. I mean people who actively oppose the faith. Stephen Hawking, I believe, big evolution guy, whatever his name was, buried in there, or at least memorialized in there. I'm like, this is a church. This is not for the profane. This is for the holy. But here we are. William Tyndale was also memorialized here. Yeah. Anyone who doesn't know, he's I believe the first person to have made an English translation of the Bible, and I believe, I've got the Gutenberg, which was the first that. I don't actually know if it pops up on my screen here. No, it's on some of my older camera angles, sort of just here off screen. I could reposition my camera and show it. It's a big copy reprint of the Gutenberg Bible. So if you want to see my big old Gutenberg Bible, go to some of my channels from when I first moved this house. Videos from when I first moved this house, and you'll have a really nice picture of it. Look, there we go. And this is Wesleyan or Methodist Central Hall. It was lovely. Sorry, I'm drinking ginger. I probably should not have had the drink. There's a big picture, not a big statue. This is a roughly life-size statue of John Wesley. He's 5'4". He's not a very big man. And their chapel, and it's just what it's called. It's a Methodist Central Hall. I got a picture of his Bible. You can see this little bit of engraving there. He's famous for, you can see it looks like two of his fingers are in there. It's because a lot of them are like these two are, because a lot of them will have his fingers in there like this, holding a spot in the Bible open to represent his preaching of the gospel. This is the homeless Jesus. This and the lovely wife. Methodist Central Hall is just a neat place. It's got a chapel. Not a lot going on. I mean, they have a lot going on. Big organ hall. They do concerts there, but by the Children of Methodism. This was just a memorial of Wesley there. And this was Wesley's chapel, still in London. This was Wesley's actual chapel. It's right by his house. And this is where he preached for a long time. A lot of people say if Methodism had a cathedral, this would be it. Methodist churches are historically plain, not ugly, but also not necessarily the most beautifully decorated like a lot of the cathedrals. Like this is the inside. A lot of this was definitely added in later. You can't see it clear from this picture, but there's like gold and stuff on here. And this is still fairly plain for one of for a really nice church. I think it's just gorgeous, but for a lot of places especially like cathedrals, they'd be far more decorated than this, as you saw through the pictures. But this is not the original Wesley pulpit. That's downstairs. You'll have a picture of me in there. This is where they preach from. They are massively liberal. Their sermon we sat in for on Sunday was like textbook liberation theology. It was. And that's a shame, but this place itself, lovely. It was great to walk around, see the history, walk through a lot of Methodist footsteps. It also functions as a museum, as many of the churches and cathedrals in London and stuff do during the weekdays, especially. They literally function as a museum. But then of course on Sundays they're like, hey, museum's closed, we're chapel. But beautiful. This was added in clearly later. I still think this is beautiful. I may not agree with everything they teach, but it's clear by color of my shirt. I like bright colors and stuff like that. And these are original. So, right. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And then the second is like it. All right. These are the two great commandments and the creed. And these were there. These were like, hey, you need to know these. You need to learn these. These are going to shape you. These are going to form you. Hold to these things. And they have a little Bible there. This was what they put on the pulpit upstairs here. And again, just taking pictures from other sides. And then this is Is this the graveyard of the? Yeah, this is their graveyard on the Wesley home. So there's the Dissenters cemetery across the street, which we'll get to. But this is outside Wesley's actual home, and this is a little tour of it. This is Wesley's office. So you can tell, still rather plain. This chair, like his mother's, has a multi-purpose. This plaque thing is part of it. You can push it back and use it as a writing desk too. I think it was a librarian's chair is what it was called, or librarian's desk. But you can use it like a chair, or you can lean it back, turn around, and use it as a desk. Wesley was very much a get as much as you can out of what you can. Try not to spend too much money. This is a little prayer spot. This little kneeler, this thing is worn in. Like I almost fell when I put my knees in it because I expected it to be a little more sturdy, and they like dipped in heavily. Was this Fletcher's? Yeah, this is. Oh, whose was this? Was this Fletcher's? I believe this was Fletcher of the Methodist movement. Again, lots of Methodists don't get talked about nearly enough, but many famous Methodists stayed here. Yeah, John Fletcher, study chair. And this was a picture of the Dissenter Cemetery, which we got to go into. Susanna Wesley's buried over there, and amazing woman. This is a charred Bible found at the Epworth factory. You can read this here if you'd like, but they're not entirely 100% certain where it came from, but they do have their ideas. And this was just stuff in the museum of theirs. That's where this came from, in the museum under the chapel. And the Christian occupation of China. China's got a very messy history with Christianity. This is the Bible of Thomas Murray. Like, there is so much cool stuff down here. This is John Wesley's pulpit. And again, as with before, I got to do a little bit of preaching out of this, as did quite a few others. But we were mainly there, of course. There were others there, but of course, odds are they were already Christian. So, but this was just super neat. This is one of the others. And we just had a blast. I went around taking pictures of people taking pictures, which is what's going on here. It was a lot of fun. I say that my picture stopped going forward early. That was weird. Again, me at the pulpit. But this is Thomas Coke. He's massive figure for Methodism. We'll just have a whole maybe series of streams or something on famous Methodists at some point. Unfortunately, no time for that today. This is the Foundry Chapel. So this is not the original Foundry. If you don't know what the Foundry is, John Wesley put together quite a bit of money and bought an old cannon factory that had an explosion in it, and converted it not only into his home, but into the first big Methodist preaching hall. And this is a memorization of that. The original Foundry building is no longer there. Unfortunately, man, that would be so awesome to be able to go in there. A lot of great Methodist history happened there. His mom came to live there for a short time before she passed away. This was, of course, the big place where they were having their giant preaching meetings. There was training of pastors going on here. So much history in the Foundry. Unfortunately, most of it's gone. This is just some beautiful glass. And this is the inside of the chapel. It's really small. These pieces of wood are from a group that the Wesley Chapel are partnered with. They had to close down their old building. It was an historic building. A flood happened, and then they didn't have enough money to repair the building afterwards. They just couldn't afford it. So what they did is they took some of the wood from there, I think their cross, and fashioned a cross out of it, which is what that little cross right there is from. This was Charles Wesley's organ, I believe, or at least that he may have had more than one organ. I don't know, but this was an organ, the organ he regularly played on. We didn't get a chance to fire it up in here, unfortunately. But this is the Dissenters' graveyard. This is Susanna's tombstone. We didn't have a chance to try and get around. We were moving quickly. Then a little tiny white over in this farther portion of it. But John Bunyan was also buried there. There were a lot of famous dissenters buried here. Dissenters, anyone who doesn't know what a dissenter was. So the Church of England was the established church. If you were not part of the Church of England, you were basically classified as a dissenter, unless you were like Roman Catholic, then you're Roman Catholic. But Baptists, Puritans, eventually Methodist, groups like those, Quakers, were classified as dissenters. And this is as we're going through London. I took this picture because this is like the picture of London in a nutshell here. Ancient building, right? You can see these turrets, modern, brand new buildings, and then crane in the background. That is everywhere. It was actually super fascinating to see as we took a little boat tour. as we were going through here. And there's a lot of cool stuff, historical stuff here. If you go to London, you'll see a lot of this stuff. This was my little ghost pal on the bridge. I took a picture of him. And that thing right there, I don't know why I'm pointing with my hand like that'll work. This is called the Eye. You can go up this giant Ferris wheel. You're up there 30, 45 minutes, and it just goes around, and you can see tons of London. You see Big Ben there, which means Westminster's on the other side over there. And I hate heights, so I didn't go up it, but that's what this is. And this is a John Wesley Memorial outside of... I don't remember where this was outside of. I'm going to be honest with you. No, this is outside of Wesley Chapel. I do remember this is. This modern building, of course, a building that's been built around after the fact. We got a chance to go here. I will zoom in a little for anyone who wants to read this after the fact. Again, we're at an hour and 20 minutes, so unfortunately, I don't have too much more time to keep going here. But there was so much great stuff. I don't know how I keep doing this. But this is another statue of John Wesley. You can see his fingers are again in the Bible. This was outside of St. Peter and Paul's, I want to say. And this is a pose I did with that first John Wesley one. I actually need to get that photo. Here's a better one of where you can see the Bible's open. He's proclaiming the gospel. This was just a book I read. We'll talk about this on the channel at some point. It's called How to Study the Bible's Use of the Bible. I read it while we were on the trip. And again, another John Wesley memorial. Just for anyone who wants to, how do I get that to go away? To read this after the fact. So feel free to pause it, but we've got to move on. So we have, that is the end of London. And then I'll just stop sharing my screen and share some of these books here. For anyone, this is probably going to be a part much people are going to tune out of. If you are, thank you for staying and watching. I know this is nerdy history stuff, boring American, going around England, touring things. But there's a lot of important Methodist history there. And this is just a very, very, very tiny taste of a bunch of that. Hopefully that will inspire you to look into a lot of these things, go and look into it. Especially if you're Methodist, this is our own history we need to learn. Again, postcards that were free. Let's put them like between these piles of books over here. Of course, I have my James commentary. I'll be putting it on this growing pile of commentaries right here, that on my bookshelf over there. This was at Westminster Abbey. So they have this memorial there called the Unknown Warrior. I got this because I'll be making some illustrations from this for a larger work in my Messianic series. But the unknown soldiers, well, a soldier we don't know who he was, in the bombing runs, not only did soldiers die, some of the tombstones and stuff got destroyed. So we don't know who was buried. So they made this memorial, and not even the royalty will walk over this tombstone. In Westminster Abbey, there's tombstones all over the place in there. People are literally buried in the ground. You'll walk over them. C.S. Lewis is buried in there. William Shakespeare, tons of famous people. And this is the one no one will walk over, because this soldier doesn't just represent himself. He represents all of the soldiers who died in World War II, giving their lives. So held with great esteem and honor. And, World War II is brutal. It just was. But we don't have time for that. From a Mother's Pen, selections from the spiritual writings of Susanna Wesley. Then to get into this. And again, I will link some of the writings of her a particular biography I've read. It's available on EBSCO for free. But it's more like a novel than a normal biography. So it's actually really engaging and entertaining. This is Thomas Coke in World Methodism. Thomas Coke was a huge figure in Methodism, sailed back and forth from England 7 times. Ended up dying in Ireland. That's where he spent his last days. Famous all around, preaching, massive figure in the early Methodist movement. Worked a lot with John Wesley himself in helping with Methodism. Of course, Francis Asbury. I have a biography of his in my closet, so I probably shouldn't have bought this little booklet, but here we are. Again, especially for American Methodist, huge figure. Him and John, of course, had some major clashes, and that's just because their personalities, immovable force and a mountain. Captain Thomas Webb, primitive physics, and Oxford Castle I've already talked about. And then some of the non-Methodist, non-history things I got, other than, of course, these things right here. I got this large introduction. 1 second to get back. Ignore all this stuff in the background. So this is by itself Liturgy of the Ante-Nicene Church. This is literally a collection and some commentary on liturgies in the ancient church. A lot of people talk about how you learn theology from the liturgies. Well, I'm going to be doing some of that and making some apologetics too. But this was something I found in a used bookstore right by Lincoln College, if you're ever there. It was an awesome used bookstore. I think it's called St. Philip's. And Petrology by Johannes Queston. And it's just a 3-volume introductory. Let me see if this is better. Into patristic writings. Patristic literature is volume 1. Volume 2 is the ante-Nicene literature after Irenaeus. And then volume 3 is the golden age of Greek patristic literature. And it's supposed to serve as an introduction to these. I read a lot of fathers. I have read a lot of fathers. I've read several, I believe 2 volumes out of the Schaff collection, and then tons of selections from several other volumes. I've almost completed one of the volumes of Augustine's writings. In completing 1 volume of Augustine's writings sounds like a lot, and then it's also not a lot because he just wrote so much. It's insane. But I got this because a lot of people ask me about getting into patristics. Where do I start? I just started at the beginning and just read chronologically forward. But I got this to be like, hey, if this is a good resource, whenever I eventually get the chance to read this, maybe this is something I can recommend to people or even lend out to people and let them use. So that's why I've got these. And that is it. That is my big Wesleyan tour. There's a lot more we could have talked on. I didn't get pictures of everything. There's so much there. If you ever get a chance to go to England, funnily, London was actually my least favorite spot. It had a lot of cool historical stuff, but everything was commercialized. I mean, every aspect. It felt like walking down the streets was more of a business than walking down a street. If you said, excuse me, or anything, like the stereotype of New York, minus the violence, no one's talking, they're just going. Even if you accidentally bump each other, they just keep going. They're not stopping. And only stopping if there's a stop sign or something like that. And the churches were commercialized, right? Everything's museums. They're like, you can donate here, tons of stuff. It was just a weird experience. And of course, we have a few million people living in London. So of course it's going to be different than most places. But tons of people I talked to who work in London were like, yeah, I would never, ever want to live in London because of this. And it was just a weird experience. Of course, when we get into a lot of the places, everyone was in it. They would talk to you. Everyone was very nice, very friendly. But it was just weird. But everywhere else, Sheffield, Epworth, only, even Oxford in some of the places didn't feel as commercialized. London, Bristol, Pill, Salisbury, everyone was so nice. It was a pleasant experience. A lot of them were just very welcoming, and you could tell where the people were just nice because that's how their culture is, and some of the people who were just nice because they genuinely wanted to be nice to you and get to know you and talk to you. And it was just an awesome experience. I think Pill and Salisbury especially were 2 of my favorite stops. But it's just a lovely little tour. So hopefully this can be a good, very, very crude introduction to you for a lot of these Methodist things. And I'll try and include resources if you want to dig deeper. And just a neat little way to tour around London if you can't go yourself because it's quite expensive. I worked 8 months of overtime to make this happen. So it was worth it. It was very much worth it, but not cheap. So you guys, that is where we actually will end it now today because I've got to get ready to head out to lunch. So you guys have a wonderful day. God bless.